Let's talk about gridding. Hey there, I'm Sarah with the Notorious Needle, and I want to empower you to break the rules of conventional cross stitch so you can make whatever you want. So what is gridding? Gridding is a way to mark your cross stitch fabric to make it look more like your pattern chart. On your chart, you have a grid, and every 10 squares on that grid is marked with a heavier grid line. Why grid at all? You can count your fabric by 10 squares at a time instead of counting one at a time. So if you're a cross-country stitcher like I am and you stitch all of one color first before moving on to another color, you might have sections of your pattern that are dozens of stitches apart. It's much easier to count accurately if your fabric is gridded. There's two primary ways for gridding. One is to write on the fabric, and the other is to weave an extra thread into the fabric. So with the first way, writing, you don't want to write with just anything. It's hard to erase. What you need to grid your fabric is a water erasable pen. Here's one that I found on Amazon. The color of the pen that you use to grid the fabric should strongly contrast the color of the fabric. This pen is bright blue, and you can see it clearly when I write on the fabric. First, test a small corner of the fabric and wait a few hours and try to wash it off to make sure that the water-soluble pen will actually wash off of your fabric. To grid, start in the center. Line up your pen and grid over the holes. Count 10 squares and write along the next set of holes. Keep doing this across the entire length of cloth. Count twice to make sure you don't make any mistakes. Flip your fabric 90 degrees and write along the other direction. Now your fabric looks just like your pattern chart. You can also use the water-soluble pen to mark the center, or with your pattern gridded, you know just how far away from the corner you can start at the edge of your pattern. Extend the lines beyond the edges of your pattern so you can see them even after you start stitching. How do you remove the water-soluble ink? Simple. You just soak it in water. Follow the directions on the package for the water-soluble pen that you purchased. Using the erasable ink to grid your fabric is really fast. The only problem is, if you make a mistake, you have to wash it out before you can correct that mistake, and that may take some time. The other method for gridding your fabric is to use a wire. You could use fishing wire, but that tends to be rather thick and somewhat clear, which makes it a little bit harder to see against your fabric. Again, you want a wire, just like a pen, that's going to be a color that's in high contrast to your embroidery fabric. On my most recent project, I tried a product called Easy Count Guideline. I did find it very easy to use. Let me show you. Easy Count Guideline boasts that you can cut your cross-stitching time by at least a third. While I didn't measure my time, I did find that it was a lot easier to cross-stitch, and I didn't have to count and recount and then triple count to avoid miscounting mistakes. Easy Count comes on a spool. It looks like you should thread the wire through this little hole here, but in the directions they specifically state not to remove the cover from the spool. So instead, I pulled my wire out the side, and it worked just fine and did not unravel. The product also comes with these easy to follow instructions to grid your fabric. While I did find the instructions helpful, I did make a few changes. I'm going to thread a piece of wire into my needle to help get it through the cloth easier. It's a little bit slippery, so you may want to have a long tail on the other side of the eye of the needle. When you grid your fabric, with the wire, you need to grid it in multiples of 10, just like with the pen. But instead of just counting 10 and writing across, you have to weave the wire through the fabric. So I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner and count 10 columns. 1. And now I'm going to count 4 squares down. All right, now I've counted 10 over and 4 down. I'm going to go 4 more down. Then I'm going to continue counting 6, 4, 6, 4. And there I finished the first column. I am up for 4, down for 6, up for 4, down for 6, 4 and 6 and 4 and 6 and so on. Double counting each way to make sure that I have counted correctly. I did 4 and 6 because 4 plus 6 is 10. Now I am going to leave the wire connected. This is one of the cool things that they told you to do in the instructions. You leave the wire connected so that when you're done, you just have one big piece that you need to pull out. And that's especially useful for a small piece of scrap, for a small piece of fabric like this. If you're using a larger piece, you may want to just cut it and have a separate piece for each column and a separate piece for each row, and then tie off the ends. But for a little piece like this, I'm going to leave it all connected. You definitely want to make sure that you have enough wire that hangs off the edge of your fabric so that you can see where the wire is even after you've stitched over it. So I'm going to count 10 columns over, and I'm not going to pull the wire quite all the way through. I've got this little loop here, so when I'm done, I can just pull the loop out. Now I'm going to continue on 4, 6, 4, 6, and so on, up and down until I've completed all of the columns in this scrap piece of fabric. When you're stitching on the nylon wire, it's important not to pierce the wire. That's why we use nylon and not embroidery floss. If you pierce the wire using a pointy embroidery needle and you go through it, you won't be able to slip it out from behind your stitches. It's slippery stuff, so I triple knotted the two ends, but here is the first part of the finished grid. All of the columns are connected. This is one long piece of nylon wire. Now I'm going to go over in the same pattern. I'm going to go over 4, under 6, over 4, under 6, and I want to make sure that my over 4 on the rows crosses the over 4 from the columns. So I finished gridding using the nylon wire, and this is what it looks like. Every 10 stitches there is a cross piece of wire, and you can easily see 100 stitches in each of these square boxes. Now if you use the weaving method, you can use however many squares you want. You can go up 6 and down 4, or you can go up 8 and down 2, or vice versa. Whatever makes it easier for you to see your fabric and count it. Wherever the grid lines cross is where the grid lines should cross on your pattern, making it way easier to count. Also, while moving your hoop around and changing your embroidery frame, you don't want to tug on the wires too much. This could create holes wherever the wire pierces the fabric. Now, those holes usually disappear when you wash and iron your fabric, but one of the reasons why people like to use the wire, the nylon wire, instead of the water soluble pen is so you don't have to wash your project if you don't want to. Here is an example of a project that I gridded with the Easy Glide nylon wire. It's a baby bib, and I wanted to show you how to remove the nylon wire. Here is the back of the project where you can see that I have one long string for all of the columns that I gridded, and then another long string for the few rows that I gridded. I'm just going to snip off the knots and slide the wire right out. That was easy. Took less than 2 minutes. There's no doubt if you want to get your gridding done quickly, you should use the water soluble pen. The part that takes longer is on the side of cleanup. Washing the fabric takes longer than just slipping the wire out from underneath your stitches. When you're using linen or even weave with a very fine stitch count, you'll probably want to use the wire. Most of the water soluble pens for gridding your fabric have a thicker tip. The tip is not fine enough to get in between the fibers, and it makes it really hard to see where your needle is supposed to go, which moots the whole point. So which way do you grid? Do you use the water soluble pen, or do you use nylon wire? Or do you cheat and buy pre-gridded fabric? This is an example of fabric from Zweigart. This is 20 count Aida cloth, gridded as you can see with the gray line. And just like the water soluble pen, this washes right out in lukewarm water. Some stitchers just always grid as a precaution against miscounting. There is nothing wrong with that. If that's what works for you, go for it. What do you prefer, to grid or not to grid? Let me know. Stitch on!